We are here to talk about care coordination and managing services, specifically to care communities, specifically to the idea of the time that comes when your elderly parent can no longer stay at home, or they actually want to move to a care community. How do you manage this situation? You have the skills. I'll share it with you. I'm Pamela D Wilson, caregiving expert, advocate, and speaker. Let's move on to the normal housekeeping tasks, and then we'll get going. As you know, I use the term elderly parent or elderly parents. Substitute that term for the person for whom you're taking care of. The outline for this module is in the course materials. Print those slide handouts. Follow along with me. So the objectives of working with care communities and working with their staffs. By the end of this section, you should be able to identify steps to find a care community that meets the long-term needs of elderly parents. You should be able to create a process to remain involved and oversee the care of your elderly parents, regardless of what type of setting they live in: senior apartment, independent living, retirement community, assisted living, or a memory care community. In the module, I have included a document, which was the list of, I call it 20 plus questions that I used. I would give this to my clients when they were interviewing care communities. So in the last section, I talked about the process and the constraints that I use to find care communities for my clients. My goal would be to recommend 3 communities that I vetted that met their expectations of money, location, health, and other aspects of care. Then my recommendation was for the children to go look at these communities themselves, ask these questions, and then decide which communities to show to their elderly parents. So included in this module is my list of 20 questions. Because this process is detailed, you're basically moving your parent out of a home, you might be selling a home. Know that you are making a significant long-term choice that will affect the care of your elderly parents. I always do recommend that you screen communities before taking your parents for a tour, because pre-screening communities avoids scaring an elderly parent to death when you visit a community and you realize it is the worst possible choice. When you take a parent to a community, you want it to be positive. So use the questions on the attached list. Request a visit at a meal time so you can see who lives in that community. Take pictures. You cannot take pictures of residents or other people. That would be a privacy violation. But you can take photos of what the room looks like, the common areas when no people are sitting there. You want to gather as much information as possible and make sure that you are asking everybody the same question. So you want an apples to apples comparison. If possible, and they will allow you to do so, talk to the residents who live there while you are there. You can also request referrals, but again, that community is going to have to get permission from that family to talk to you. I also recommend that you listen to the Caring Generation podcast. It's called What is Assisted Living? On that podcast, there is an interview about placement and referral agencies, and there are new state laws for companies like A Place for Mom. You probably see the commercials all the time on television saying, oh, we find the best place for your loved one, and there never, ever is any cost to you. That never, ever any cost to you can be a problem. Listen to this podcast, ask about state laws and how they get paid, because many times, this will surprise you, they get paid a lot of money for making that referral. And people who don't agree to pay them, communities who don't agree to pay them, they may never show you the best community for your elderly parent because they don't get paid. So let's talk about how we talk to elderly parents about moving, which is a difficult, sticky subject. In this series, we've been talking about the steps to help elderly parents remain at home. Many of these steps and actions translate to the care of elderly parents who move out of the home to a care community. Your elderly parent wants to remain at home. How do you begin this discussion? It's easy if you completed the time and the financial budget and a care plan. That gives you a basis to begin discussions about moving. Because if you have those routine, ongoing discussions that we talked about, go back to the module about routines, through that you have discussed, when your care gets to this point, I don't know that I can do it by myself anymore. We have to look at other options. That is hiring in-home caregivers, or it's moving you out to a community. For example, at the point where you are incontinent and none of us can manage it, you have to be safe. You have to have good hygiene. I don't want you getting sores on your bottom. We need to move you to a care community that can help manage that. I can't be doing laundry 4 or 5 times a day. When you are awake all night and I need to sleep, that's the time we have to move you into a care community. When you need more care than the family can provide, that is the time we need to move you to a care community. Moving elderly parents usually results when these care and these time requirements are more than you can do, more than you and a paid caregiver can do, more than you and an adult daycare center can do. Also, time concerns can exist when your elderly parent has Alzheimer's or dementia, and they're really not safe without somebody being there 24 hours a day. It could also be a similar situation where elderly parents who don't have memory loss have physical concerns. They're falling at home, they have mobility problems. But the question is, what do you do when your elderly parent should move and they dig in their heels and they say no? I will share my personal experiences with these situations. In situations where I was the care manager for the children, there was a point where if the children were not the power of attorney, if they didn't have any reason to make a decision for an elderly parent, if the parent was still in control, many times we had to leave it up to chance, which is not what we want to do, but it will force the situation eventually. If your parent is truly unsafe living at home, if they forget to turn off the faucet and they leave stove burners on and they fall and they can't get up and they're not feeding the dog and they're refusing care, eventually something will happen that will force your elderly parent to have to move. For example, I had a client in this situation who was a significant fall risk. One day she fell. She couldn't get up off the floor, and I had caregivers giving into the home. The caregiver found her. We had to call 911. She broke a hip. We never returned her back home. Her refusal to move out could have ended up to be a really good situation. She could have moved out, been active, moved into a care community, been happy. Instead, she moved into a nursing home because she broke a hip and she couldn't gain full mobility because she refused to exercise. The choices of your elderly parents, we all have the right to make bad choices. How many of us have done that throughout our life? That's what happens when elderly parents refuse. Now let's turn this into another scenario where you are the court-appointed guardian because your elderly parent has dementia. This is the point where you have to make the choice. And in many situations, I would try to talk to my client about it. Depending on how they reacted, if they were adamant and got very upset and just threw a fit, I dropped the subject. But I went and I found a care community. And this is kind of the part where you're being a little dishonest, but you have to get the job done because of a safety issue. I would arrange everything. I would have a caregiver or a family member pick up the client on the day of the move and take them out first thing in the morning. The movers would come to the house, move the furniture, go to the assisted living community, get everything set up. At the end of the day, my client, that parent, went home to the assisted living community. Now, they may have thrown a fit when they got there, but the discussion was, this is the place where we're now living so that you can be safe. We'll make sure that it goes smoothly. In some situations, I would hire caregivers to be with that client for the first week to make sure that the care staff provided the care that I wanted, to make sure that they knew how to get to meals, to make sure that they met other people in the communities, because it's a huge adjustment. One day your parents living in their home, the next day they are in a strange place with all these strangers and they don't know what to do. It's a tough transition. But as the family caregiver or the power of attorney or the guardian, you do have a responsibility to their safety. If you don't make those decisions and something happens, you are legally responsible. So it is very difficult when elderly parents don't want to move, but the situations are workable. You can work it out. If you follow all of the recommendations in these modules and you talk with elderly parents about the consequences of not participating in care, you will be less likely to arrive at this type of situation where your elderly parents are digging in their heels and refusing to move because you have had routine discussions, because you have had ongoing discussions. You have a plan before all of this that says, when this happens, we all agree it's time to move to a care community. Let's talk about care conferences. Communities will initiate quarterly, 6-month, or annual care conferences to review the care that they provide for your elderly parents, and they do this mostly to adjust the rates. When your parent moves into a community, some communities have a flat rate that includes everything, so $5,000 a month. Other communities will say the rate is $4,000, and we have what are called levels of care. The levels of care are based on a point system. The point system depends on the care that your elderly parent needs. Bathing every day may be 5 points. Medication reminding of 2 medications may be 2 points. If it's 10 medications, it may be 10 points. Those points put you into levels of care, which usually have ranges between $300 to $500 per level, and there are usually 3 levels of care. Your elderly parent moves in at $4,000. Care 1 makes it $4,500. Care level 2 makes it $5,000. Care level 3 makes it $5,500. Those care conferences are to review care and also money. My recommendation is to also turn this around to the care community. You as the primary caregiver want to request care meetings at least quarterly to review your care agenda for elderly parents and the expectations that you have from that care community. This is not a one-way street. Remember, everything in caregiving is 50-50. If you completed the care plan that I gave you for your elderly parents, you know what they need every day. If you hired in-home caregivers and you had a checklist, you know what they need every day. You know what type of monitoring is needed. For example, if you want weekly weights taken, you ask for that. If you want blood pressure monitoring, temperature, nutritional supplements, exercises, other activities, you ask for that. You're going to pay for it, but you ask for it. Because of your high-level involvement that you've had all this time, the transition to a care community is easier for you. Ongoing oversight and coordination is still required of you. Know that the staff at many communities are under guidelines. They have parameters, they have constraints for care. Make sure that you understand what that is, and also understand the time that the staff can spend each day providing care for your elderly parents, because that has a limit. In some cases, it's an hour a day. In some cases, it's an hour and a half a day. Again, that relates to levels. When I had clients who lived in care communities who needed more care, many times I would hire outside caregivers to come in because that was less expensive than going up another $500 a month in some cases. Or in some cases, I was trying to prevent my client from having to move from assisted living to a nursing home, which was double the price. My staff and I also, we showed up for care meetings. You have the ability to manage this. You have the information. Let's talk about care charts. All communities have a chart book or a care log. It's usually a 3-ring binder that sits in an office, in a care management office, sometimes in a nursing office if they have a nurse on staff. That chart has a medication administration record. It's called a MAR. So that's an acronym you're here. Well, what's on the MAR? What do we know? A MAR lists all of the medications that your elderly parent is prescribed and provided by the care staff. Usually, a doctor provides a list of medications, and that turns into the MAR. My recommendation for you is to gain approval. You're probably going to have to be the power of attorney to do this, though. If you have a HIPAA signed by your parent, you probably can too, but a power of attorney definitely holds more weight, as does a guardian. Although, as we talked, you're going to have to explain to the communities what that responsibility is. My recommendation is to gain approval to look at that chart every time you visit, because there are notes in there, the MAR is in there, and at the end of every month, you want a copy of that MAR. One of the biggest concerns is that somehow medications get changed without your permission, not given. These are things that you want to know about, because those caregivers are required to initial that MAR every time a medication is given. If it's not given, there has to be some kind of a system to note that it wasn't given. Sometimes that's a circle around the day and the time. Monitoring the MAR and making sure that you are contacted before any medication changes is very important. I had so many situations with my clients where a medical provider, a doctor, changed a medication without asking me that harmed my clients because that provider didn't look at the allergies or a prior medical history, and it turned out to be a disaster. In some cases, my clients ended up going to the emergency room. Along with that MAR in the care chart, there are probably other records that you want to be able to see. You want permission from that community that you can review all of the information in the chart, and you want to ask for copies of that MAR every month. Normally, they don't like you making copies of information in care charts because of liability, but you know what? You have a cell phone, you can take pictures. Pictures are worth 1,000 words, especially when you go visit your elderly client and you show up and the bathroom's dirty, or they're in a pair of Depends that hasn't been changed. Take a picture. Let's talk about medical care. When you move an elderly parent to a care community, you have the choice to keep your current physician, or you can change to a physician that is associated with visiting the community. Communities will do that because it is a great convenience, but it's a personal choice. For elderly parents who have mobility concerns or frequent medical changes in condition, having a visiting physician can save you a lot of time, and it can be very beneficial to your parent. It's important, if you do that, that you have a very close relationship with the physician. That physician should know who you are. You should know how to contact that physician. When I manage the care for my clients, I use the medical portal to contact physicians. I would call the office and request a phone call. I would have phone conversations with them. If I knew a day and a time that they were visiting my client at the care community, I would meet the physician at least once a quarter, sometimes once a month, depending on the severity of the need. All of this is within your control when you learn the system and you learn how that practice works. You want to know the names of the reception staff, the staff in the office. If you can get a direct phone number, do that. Having that information will help you learn the guidelines of the practice and ways to get the care that you want for an elderly parent. So back to that idea of permission to obtain records and speak with medical providers. Again, your elderly parent can sign a HIPAA release if you're not the medical power of attorney. That way you can speak to everyone involved. If you followed the prior recommendations in this series, you might have already established files for every doctor that your elderly parent sees. I hope you have. The benefit of having this documentation is so that you can continue to monitor trends in weight, blood pressure, other measures, and you have a history, so that when an elderly parent has an issue and a physician makes a recommendation, you can say, I agree with that, or I disagree, and this is why, because I have these records. If your elderly parent sees specialists, I recommend keeping those specialists, even though you may change to a primary care doctor who goes to the community. Specialists are worth their weight in gold. You can always hire and schedule wheelchair transportation to go out to medical appointments if that service isn't provided by the community. If you can't attend a medical appointment, again, you can hire a care manager that you trust to attend the appointment and report back to you. If there are any issues, the care manager can talk to you about them afterward and you can make other decisions. There are a lot of ways to remain involved in the care of elderly parents. Even if you cannot be present for every single meeting or appointment, you can actually have care managers attend care conferences for you. Let's talk about community staff. Also having another relationship point or another point of oversight with community staff is a good idea. That's where care managers also benefit. I managed the care for many clients and reported to adult children. And a lot of times, just by showing up and being around, I would see things that I took pictures about that I talked to the management staff about. It's good if you can become personally acquainted with the staff at the community where your elderly parent lives. It will make a difference in the quality of care that your parent receives. Staff should also know that you visit to check in on your parents. As you might imagine, family members who don't visit, their loved ones don't get an equal amount of time and attention. Always sign in and out of the visitor's book in the lobby so that they know that you show up, so that they know that you've been there. When you sign in, make sure you say hello to anybody who's sitting at the front desk, whether it's nurses, if there's an administrator office there, pop in and just say hello for a minute. Say hello to the administrator, the executive director, if they're in their office. Visit with the care staff. Also know that you can ask for the schedules of the care staff so you know who is working when. Obviously, the schedules can change, but you can always ask. The daily care staff, those CNAs or the other people, they are the people who have the greatest contact with your elderly parent and who really knows what's going on in that community. And many times they will be happy to share information or concerns with you. Establishing relationships with the daily care staff can give you confidence that mom or dad are receiving good care, or it'll give you notice that maybe you should start asking some questions before an issue arises. Always check the cleanliness of your parents' apartment when you visit. Make sure that if laundry is done by the community, that you have an inventory list to identify misplaced items. You can even go to the extent of taking pictures of everything so that if something's lost, you can say, this is the shirt that's lost, find it. More than likely, it's in another resident's room. Learn what you can from the care staff about the type and level of care provided for elderly parents. Make sure that you do ask questions about parameters and constraints so that you have clear expectations of what the care staff can do and what they can't do. That admission packet that you or your elderly parent signed, read it over, refer to it, read every page. At move-in, ask questions about anything that you do not understand. Let's talk about changes in condition, which are inevitable. Make sure that there is a notation in your parent's chart that you receive an immediate call if your elderly parent has a change in medical condition like a fever, vomiting, or a fall. You should also receive a call if your parent is sent to a hospital emergency room so that you can follow up with the hospital. And if you want your parents sent to the hospital before receiving a call, you can stipulate that in writing in your parent's file. The last thing you want is care in the community either deciding not to send your parent out, and I'll share an example about it. They're not medically trained. They have constraints and parameters, of course, unless it's a nursing home, and we'll talk about that. That's another situation. But many times they don't have the experience to make that type of decision. They should call you. Estate planning documents, the living will, the medical power of attorney, those should always be in the chart of your elderly parent for reference. Let me share a story of one of my clients. I was a guardian for this lady. She had dementia, but early stages, so forgetful, but not terribly forgetful. But she did have a lot of health issues, and one of them was chronic bronchitis and pneumonia. She was in a memory care community. One day I show up at 11:30 and my client is still in bed. And I noticed that she's not wearing her oxygen. She has an oxygen concentrator in a room and she should have had tubing on her nose. So I wake her up and I say, hey, what's going on? Did you have breakfast today? She's like, oh no, I just haven't felt well and I'm just here in bed. Well, she looked a little gray. And so I put her oxygen on her and I ran down to the nurse's station and I got what is called a pulse oximeter. It looks kind of like this. You put it on the finger and it measures oxygen levels. Her oxygen level was 85, which is low. I rushed back to the nurse's station and I said, I want you to call 911. We have got to get her out of here. Her oxygen is low. We did that and I stayed for a few minutes before I went over to the hospital. And so I asked the care staff and I said, what was going on this morning that she was still in bed at 11:30? And they said, well, she told us that she didn't feel well, so we just let her sleep. If I had not shown up, more than likely, two things would have happened. She would have not gotten enough oxygen to her brain. She could have had a stroke. She could have gone anoxic. She could have died. At the hospital, she was diagnosed with pneumonia and another complication. The care staff didn't know to check her pulse oxygen. Again, they're not trained. They can't say, oh my gosh, this person looks a little gray. They're not wearing the oxygen. Maybe we should do that. They're not trained to do that. What they are trained to do, though, is to call you if a person has a change in condition. If they refuse to go to a meal, you have to be that specific. In that situation, unfortunately, the normal staff who would have been proactive, who knew to call me and make that phone call, they weren't working that morning. So there are glitches that will happen with your elderly parent that are unfortunate. This is why showing up or having somebody to show up can happen. This was not an isolated incident. My staff and I, by showing up at unexpected times, caught a lot of care issues with my clients. You have to be that person who can oversee this. If you can't, hire a care manager, hire some caregivers to go in and check every now and then. Make sure that they know what they're checking for, though. It's up to you to make sure that your parents get the care they need in their home with caregivers, out of the home with care situations, and with other caregivers. So, summary of working with care communities and working with staff. Establishing positive relationships with staff, monitoring care, and reviewing the chart of elderly parents are very positive aspects of coordinating and managing care. Learn about resident care communities if they have one. So that is where a community will have residents be on a committee to talk about the care of their parents, to give suggestions, to express concerns. Also become acquainted with the Ombudsman program and the Ombudsman for the community. The Ombudsman, O-M-B-U-D-S-M-A-N. You can look it up. It's a term for a person who is employed by the state. In some cases, it's a volunteer, but they represent the concerns of families with elderly parents who live in care communities. If you have tried to work something out with a care community by going to the staff and the management staff and the executive director, and you still cannot work it out, you can get the ombudsman involved to help you work out that situation. The idea in all of these situations is that you really do want to be that advocate for your elderly parent. It's your responsibility, and your parents depend on you because they probably are at a point where they cannot advocate for themselves anymore. You are that person. Through this series, through these modules, you have the tools to be an amazing advocate for your parents, to manage their care, to know what can go wrong and what can go right, and how to make situations better. I'm Pamela D Wilson, caregiving expert, advocate, and speaker. I so appreciate you joining me for this webinar. I will see you in the next webinar.